We have made it to the final speech of the debate, the second affirmative rebuttal, otherwise known as the 2AR. And this is a really fun speech because it is the only speech in the debate where there will be nobody to stand up after you are done speaking and respond to what you have said. So this is really an opportunity. It's a huge advantage to stand up and be able to give one final plea to the judge about why the plan is a great idea. And the 2AR is tapping into a deep human desire that there is hope and possibility for a better tomorrow. And so I think the 2AR can really utilize the power of the judge's innate desire to want to change things for the better, to push back against the cynicism or the pessimism of the negative team, and instead to take action against serious problems that are plaguing the United States. So let's hop into some of my tips. And you'll notice that this is actually very similar to much of my advice from the 2R, the final negative speech. The big difference is the 2AR really doesn't have to concern itself with preempting any arguments. There's no speech that comes after. Beyond that, most of the main tips are going to be very similar. So let's hop in. Right, the 2AR really is less about developing line-by-line argumentation more. Again, just like the 2R, this should be about retroactive framing, about looking back on the debate and telling the judge why you won the round in the past tense rather than just trying to make more arguments or new arguments. Certainly, judges are always advised to disregard totally new arguments in the 2AR, right? That's considered a very low, cheap shot by affirmative teams if their partner just stands up in the final speech and tries to just make a bunch of new arguments that the negative team never had an opportunity to respond to, and almost every judge will sniff that out immediately and disregard it. So you should really think about the 2AR as an opportunity to just crystallize the big arguments that happened in the debate round, and to really frame for the judge why you have won the debate. And another way of thinking about that is to explain to the judge, big picture, why is the affirmative plan a good idea? All right, at the end of the day, why will the world be a better place because of the passage of the affirmative plan rather than if we just stick with the status quo? That's the option you want the judge to be thinking about, and you want to crystallize in a very clear and direct manner why the affirmative plan will make the world better. So again, it's very similar to the 2R. You just don't need to worry about preempting, and so you just need to focus on explaining to the judge why you've won the debate. And here's this. I underline this because I just think this is so important. If you are thinking like this, it will really help you in rounds. You win the debate as the affirmative if the judge is ultimately persuaded that the plan would create a better world than the status quo, and that the affirmative has reasonably upheld their burden on each of the stock issues. So those are the two things you need to make sure to do. I would say the first one is what you primarily want to be focused on in the 2AR. You want to primarily be convincing the judge that the world is a better place if we pass the affirmative plan than if we stick with the status quo. And then another part of the job of the 2AR is on the stock issues, making sure to persuade the judge that you have upheld your burden, right? Like, yes, it might be a great idea to try to fix a problem, but if the negative team has shown that there are serious solvency issues with your plan that would prevent it from working, well, most judges aren't going to support a plan like that. So you want to make sure that you have upheld your burden on each of the stock issues by proving that there's a serious problem, that there are barriers preventing anything from being done about it, that you have a plan that would fix those problems, that your plan is topical, and that there are not serious negative disadvantages. Obviously, you only respond to the stock issues the negative team has brought up, but nevertheless, these are your two core jobs. And try to save most of your prep time for the 2AR. And I really recommend talking with your partner about what are the most important arguments, what are the most threatening negative arguments, and how do you frame why your AF arguments are more important than those negative arguments. These things are not always obvious, right? I would very often in debates just sit down and with my debate partner talk through, all right, what do you think are the most threatening negative arguments? What are we winning? Like, what is the world? What are our most persuasive arguments that the judge will vote on? And what are the arguments that will persuade the judge to vote negative? you need to do that type of critical thinking of really evaluating which arguments do you think are the most threatening, where is the negative generating the most offense, where are they sounding most persuasive, where have they perceptually gotten ahead of us in this debate, either in the cross-examinations or on the line by line, and how do we push back against that in this final speech. Make it clear to the judge how they should be evaluating the round and the choice that they're making between the AF world and the neg world. Again, always, it's a choice between the affirmative plan and the status quo. And so I think effective AF framing typically wants to cast the negative team as being pessimistic, as just advocating doing nothing in the face of a pressing problem. And so I think that's the type of framing that very often is successful in the 2AR. Not every single debate, but most debates, if you can successfully cast the negative team as just throwing up their hands and giving up in the face of a problem that is leading to serious issues, that's quite compelling. And I also urge you, I think good effective framing also, the 2AR will spin a vote for the negative as a vote for the status quo, which has serious problems. Especially if the negative team has not done serious pushes on harms, you should exploit that in the 2AR, right? The negative team has conceded that there are serious issues that are plaguing the status quo. And so any vote for the negative team is a vote to let those problems continue. Whereas at least a vote for the affirmative team is a vote for taking a step in the right direction to actually fix those problems and to take action. And so, overall, just think of the 2AR as a big picture speech. It's about really helping the judge to understand these big picture issues about how they should be voting. All right. The biggest mistake 2ARs make, or just final rebuttals in general, is they get too bogged down in just responding to all the line by line arguments, which you still need to do, but they get too bogged down in that and they spend all their time there, and they never help the judge to understand how they should be going about making their decision or the big choice that they're really making at the end of the day. And so you are relying on the judge to sit there and connect all the pieces of this puzzle together, and guess what? Sometimes it will flow in your direction and sometimes it won't, and you won't have much control over how a judge ultimately pieces those together. The only way you can get some control over that is if you are explicit about explaining that to the judge. So here's the structure of the 2AR. Here's the structure. Start with an overview, just like every other speech. Remind the judge of the big picture affirmative story that explains why the plan is a good idea, that kind of frames some of those big questions about the choice that they're making and about why it's a better option to pick the affirmative plan over the flawed status quo. Then you'll transition to the stock issues, and you'll explain why you have upheld your burden and won each stock issue. Again, I really recommend perceptually use that past tense framing. Explain why your arguments from the 2AC and 1A are already explained why the negative arguments are incorrect. Explain why the cross-examination questions that you guys asked proved why the negative arguments were flawed. Explain all this in the past tense and explain why you've upheld your burden. And so, of course, you'll answer the major negative arguments on those stock issues and establish the most important affirmative responses. Now, remember, the burden is on you as the affirmative to uphold the stock issues. So you need to respond to whatever arguments the negative brought up. It's not like when you're negative, where you can choose which arguments you want to go for. It's important that the affirmative team actually respond to every substantive negative issue that is brought up in the debate. 4. Conclude the stock issue by explaining to the judge why your main arguments under that stock issue proves that the affirmative plan is ultimately a good idea. All right. So again, this is just about impacting out why the stock issue matters and why you have upheld your burden. But notice I'm urging you to go a step further than just saying that you have upheld your burden, which is quite defensive, but instead spinning that stock issue at the end, right? Whatever arguments you made under solvency to combat the negative claims, explain at the end of the day why the fact that you have upheld your burden under the stock issue of solvency is a reason why the affirmative plan is a good idea. It means that you have proven that there is a way to take substantive action to fix a serious problem. And so that makes the affirmative plan a good idea. Rinse and repeat the stock issue steps until you've completed all the relevant stock issues. Again, don't get too bogged down in the line-by-line framing. Or the line-by-line argumentation. This speech should be much more about framing than just developing line-by-line arguments more. You should just be leaning on the line-by-line refutations that you have already made in the previous 2 affirmative speeches to conclusively prove to the judge why you have already won those questions. What you should leave a good amount of time for at the end of your speech is the underview. And leave at least 40 seconds to give the judge the big picture framing of the round, especially that choice between the affirmative and negative worlds, the choice between the affirmative plan and the choice between the status quo. And so that's the structure of the 2AR. Remember, do not make new arguments. Do not make new arguments. Parents will disregard you, and especially varsity members of the team who will be judging you in your final debates will certainly mark you down if you just stand up in the 2AR and just try to make totally new arguments. You need to think of the 2AR as really a speech that's all about big picture framing and helping the judge to understand the choice that they're making, but still covering and refuting those negative arguments by pointing back to the previous affirmative speeches. So hopefully this makes sense. You can pat yourself on the back now. You have officially made it through all of the introductory videos of debate, just the core skills, the intro to policy debate, the stock issues, and now every single one of the speeches. So you have a very solid foundation now in policy debate, hopefully. Now it's just a question of practicing. I recommend trying to watch as many varsity practice rounds as possible so that you can get a better sense for how all of these different facets of debate are deployed. And second, probably more importantly, having as many practice debates yourself. I recommend you coordinate with other members of your class, figure out times after school, on the weekends, to have a practice round here and there. The more practice rounds you have, the more familiar you will get with these sorts of issues, and the better equipped you will be to ask the right questions when you go into student coaching. Issues will arise once you start getting into the nitty-gritty of doing practice debates, and you will have a much better understanding of what you need to improve and what facets of debate you are still confused by, as opposed to just trying to, continually study these videos and just keep it all theoretical. All of this is only useful if you can implement it. So those are my 2 cents on the 2AR and about growing these skills. Hopefully that helped. If you have any questions, feel free to let me know.